is 1903, and finally, the Wright brothers have conquered the skies. Orville and Wilbur, brothers in flight. Orville and Wilbur Wright, brothers from Dayton, Ohio, would grow up and become two of the most influential men in the history of flight. As young boys, the two brothers traveled frequently because of their father's job as a bishop, but would later end up in Dayton, Ohio. This would be where the two would grow up and later become famous. This home would be where the Wright brothers would spend the majority of their life and begin their historic career. When the two grew up, time would pass, and they would plan, then later build, one of their first aircraft in 1903, which would jumpstart their journey into the history of flight. As young boys, the Wright brothers grew up in a close-knit family, which consisted of their mother Susan, who was a stay-at-home mom, Father Milton, who was a bishop, and 5 other siblings. Such a large family for the time, the two brothers would find themselves very close to one another, and as Wilbur put it, "For the time we were children, my brother Orville and myself lived together, played together, worked together, and, in fact, thought together. We usually owned all of our toys in common, talked over our thoughts and aspirations, and that nearly everything that was done in our lives had been a result of conversations, suggestions, and discussion between us." The brothers became a dynamic duo. They would work together as teenagers and in the family bike shop, and then eventually work together on the gliders in the back of that same bike shop that would become their first aircraft in history. The Wright family owned a bicycle shop in Dayton where Orville and Wilbur often worked. This was where the gliders would be made in their free time. They kept a notebook full of plans, blueprints, and many other ideas which would document their steps to their first aircraft. They would do this for 4 years before they would make their first powered aircraft. In 1899, they would come up with the Wright kite, which was a non-manned, powerless glider which consisted of 2 5-foot-long wings stacked on top of each other. This unique type of aircraft with wings stacked in such a way is called a biplane, which is a very sturdy aircraft in flight. This glider had a 5-foot wingspan and weighed around 3 to 4 pounds, which was a good starting size because it was 1, inexpensive, and 2, a low risk for the two. This glider was a test of the stability and what would work as a base platform before they put a person in the aircraft. They would continue with their gliders well after their first powered aircraft, mainly because it was a good, stable way for the brothers to test their ideas without harming anyone or taking a huge financial risk. As time went on, the major gliders came in 1901, 1902, and 1911. These dates were the precursor to the powered aircraft and the gliders that would start to look like the ones to come. The Wright glider and the Wright flyer were built and look very similar, and these would become their most famous gliders as they were the major stepping stones to their powered aircraft. Over the span of 13 years, the Wright brothers would make 15 aircraft, ranging from their first, which was the Wright Flyer 1 in 1903, to their last in 1916, which was the Wright Model L. Each plane seemed to work off of the next, and they would improve on what had worked and either fixed or removed what had hurt them. On December 17, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Orville was the first to take flight in the Wright Flyer. This date is their first historical step, as it showed the flight was possible. His flight would be roughly 120 feet and took about 12 seconds. Then Brother Wilbur would fly for 175 feet, and then Orville again for close to 200 feet. And then finally after that, Wilbur would fly for almost a minute, traveling over 852 feet, which sealed the deal in terms of proof of concept. This would be one of their first major accomplishments and would prove that what they were doing was not only possible, but realistic. One of their last planes was the Wright Model L, which looked more like the airplanes you would see today. They had successfully went from aircraft that did not look like it would lift off the ground to a model that is still used today in the span of 13 years, which is a giant leap for engineering of aircraft. The model would be one of the last that the brothers produced due to many events, which accumulated over the years and led to the separation of their construction of full aircraft. They would move on from here to produce engines instead of full aircraft, which was less of a risk for the two brothers. Toward the end of their lives, the brothers were not as involved in flight as most would think, considering they basically started flight as we know it. After years passed, Wilbur was the first to die in 1912 after he became sick on a trip to Boston. He returned to Dayton, Ohio, where he was diagnosed with typhoid fever and would pass away later that year, which took a huge toll on Orville. After Wilbur's death in 1912, Orville lost interest in the Wright Company and would retire in 1915. Lastly, Orville would die of his second heart attack in 1948 and was taken and buried in Dayton, Ohio, where the two brothers were laid to rest.